You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast with myself, Owen Walker. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the advancements of tissue oximetry for pre-hospital care with Rob Pupelis. So in the conversation, we wanted to examine the latest advancements of tissue oximetry, but also find out where the future lies within this medical technology. So to do this, I'm speaking with the CEO of Spectros Medical Devices, Rob Pupelis. Rob is at the forefront of non-invasive sensing and indeed remote monitoring in the healthcare industry. So Rob has dedicated his career to developing advanced molecular sensing devices and software that sheds light on tissue and health disease related to vascular performance and indeed tissue oximetry. Welcome, Rob, to the podcast.
Thanks, Owen, for having me. I appreciate it. Appreciate being here. Appreciate your time.
Rob, I wondered if you could just initially speak to your background and indeed why you're involved in this area of innovation.
Actually, my background is I started in plastic surgery back in the 90s, believe it or not. And I started in the area of light and lasers back when there wasn't a laser in every plastic surgery office. So I would work with the folks around my geography, like on an as-needed basis as this industry was coming about. So as we, that was sort of my beginnings. And then I ended up starting a distribution company that sold sort of stuff just in the field of plastic and reconstructive surgery. So that got us into things beyond just lasers. But here we find ourselves back in the field of light once again with the T-stat. So it's a long journey, a little over 20 years getting here. But that is what sort of connected us to this technology of oximetry.
I wondered, Rob, if we could just maybe unpack some of the problems or indeed just challenges and leverage points that you see in the industry at the moment within sort of tissue oxygenation or SpO2, so oxygen saturation monitoring, and indeed EtCO2, so end-tidal carbon dioxide monitoring. We know within post-op care, SpO2 monitoring has this sort of 30-second delay, so it's not moment by moment sort of reciprocation or accurate reflection of indeed numbers. Could you maybe speak to some of the challenges you see at the moment?
Yeah, our device is real time, so that I think that gives us an advantage, but it's also super highly specific. So we don't have the broad range of treatment that some of the other monitors you're referencing. But I think that is a shortcoming, right? All medicine needs to be as real time as possible and have as many applications as possible. So that, there always has to be development, which comes at a cost. So you've got to find people that are dedicated to that are, willing to invest. And then you have to invest in getting that information out to clinicians, of course. But I think just educating patients and also helps, right? To get the story out so that people understand that, something new might be available and it might be important to their personal outcome.
So looking at just modern practice at the moment, clinical practice in hospital and pre-hospital is evolving quite quickly. Could you maybe speak to your thoughts on the future priorities regarding tissue oximetry monitoring?
I think there's a broad range of applications. So we currently work pretty heavily in plastic and reconstructive surgery. But there are applications for even our device as is in some intraoperative and neonatal care. So that's one I think that really sort of maybe hits home with some of your providers a little more. I think the challenge is always going to be, how do you keep developing? How do you make it better? How do you get it in the hands of more people? So I think probably a big challenge is there's a way to shorten that approval time to get within more facilities and get it more in the hands of practitioners. Pardon my stumble there, but that's a huge challenge. You have to have not only the bandwidth, but the patience, the financing available to give yourself that runway to get into in front of enough people and parse through that hospital approval process, which is it's getting harder and harder. Part of it's for good reasons, but I think sometimes it just gets overcomplicated not because anyone wants to. It just has become this Goliath approval process in so many places, which is unfortunate because there are great products which should probably sail through a little faster, that need to get in people's hands quicker, and they get caught up in I don't want to say bureaucracy, but that is part of it, right? You do have those approval issues, and sometimes the people who are needing it are not even involved in the process. So that's a challenge.
Well, let's go there actually, Rob, if that's okay, because my focus really is on pre-hospital and critical care. But let's unpack the device and indeed the innovation that you steward and that you're selling into the industry, because it is fascinating. And as we spoke offline, there is this kind of symbiotic relationship of whatever happens in hospital, either in ICU or indeed the ED or indeed surgery, kind of comes out into pre-hospital care eventually. And so, like you said, this moment by moment tissue oximetry, where clinicians moment by moment can be informed about the changes in tissue oximetry is super interesting to me, because, like you said, it's about informing clinicians with as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, to make the right decisions for the patient. So could you maybe unpack your device and how it might benefit pre-hospital care maybe in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So our device is called the T-Stat, and it measures both the oxygen saturation as well as hemoglobin levels within tissue. So because we're working with circulatory systems, the outflow of blood back to the heart is just as important as the inflow into tissue. So for us, with our current focus being in reconstructive surgery, our patients are post-cancer survivors or major trauma, where part of the body has been removed from its original location and transplanted. So that could be bone, muscle, fat, skin, and its entirety is all left together. So the way you get that tissue to stay alive is by reconnecting those vessels, the arteries and the veins, in its new location. And so because those vessels were severed from the transplant location or from its original native location, then you have a weak point where there can be clotting, there can be a kink in the vessel where it's reconnected, and so blood flow can be choked out. And of course, if you can't see this, that's a problem, and it can't survive. The tissue can't survive very long without blood flow. So what our device does is it monitors in real time those two things, that there is oxygen getting into the tissue and that there is blood flow getting out of the tissue. So by watching the hemoglobin levels within the tissue, if they suddenly rise, we know that blood is getting trapped. So if there's a dramatic increase in the hemoglobin, we know that the blood flow is not getting through. So luckily, our device has I say luckily, we're very proud of it, but there was some pretty smart engineering folks on that. But our device tells within seconds, it can recognize that there is a slowdown. A lot of other technologies, older technologies, and different technologies know when it's stopped, which could be too late. Our device can sense or follow a trend that there's a slow dip or a slow rise, and it allows the clinician an early indicator to just keep a closer eye on it. Doesn't mean it's time to panic, doesn't mean it's time to rush back to the OR, but it means it's time to watch more closely. And so we could really be, our device has the ability to save any, or not personally, but to notify a practitioner in plenty of time to save the tissue if it's indeed salvageable. Some just aren't. Some just don't have the health. But we can monitor or sense early enough any potential danger and give the surgeon time to go back and fix it.
So I'm really interested in this, Rob, because I think essentially what I'm interested in is this end tissue or indeed end organ perfusion state, whereby, like you said, you can start to gain understanding of organ by organ or indeed body part by body part, what the perfusion state is, the HB levels, the oxygen saturation levels, and start to, like you say, get this moment by moment contemporaneous idea of what's happening. And I think that'd be super useful within pre-hospital care. Could you maybe speak to the data, Rob, and what's emerging in the data for your device?
Well, it's good. Yeah, we have some older studies of our original technology that have taken place, and the data shows that that timing is everything. That there is a window that you have, and it's normally just a few hours to get in there and make any corrections. So, I mean, it's pretty black and white, which is nice, right? We can so easily illustrate that. So even beyond our clinicals, we'll hear all the time a surgeon, and it's exciting for us because they love to share, right? They love to share that that the T-stat actually, notified them of something in plenty of time. I had a surgeon in the Netherlands that did a trial late last year, and they've implemented the device in their hospital system now. But her very first case, there was a problem, and she said, messaged me and said, "Oh my God, I knew before the nurses knew," because she was watching it. Our device, I didn't mention this, but uploads this secure data, encrypted data, no private information, but it uploads the raw data onto a website that the surgeons can log into, also securely, and see this a carbon copy of the graph and what's happening with this tissue in real time. And so she was like, "I knew before the nurses knew that something might be wrong." So she jumped in her car and was bedside 20 minutes later.
Which is fantastic, actually. And a lot of pre-hospital care is these IFTs, so inter-facility transfers, whereby you are with the patient over protracted periods of time. The definitive treatment's been done, but they are maybe 7, 8, 9 hour inter-facility transfers, which actually you do need this contemporaneous data. You need exact data to understand, and tissue oximetry data to understand if there is any acute deficit that needs correction. And so there is applicability, I think, with the T-stat within a whole different domain of this secondary transfer kind of IFT work, which is involved in pre-hospital care. Could you maybe speak to the sensitivity and indeed this real-time nature of readings? Because, like you said, I think one of the leverage points that we really want to drill into is, where are we now? So within SpO2 readings, and how is something like this T-stat tissue oximetry going to benefit from a sensitivity and indeed real-time perspective?
It's a real double-edged sword. You have, you can become obsessed with it, and so you have to sort of allow, technology to do its job, which is one of the reasons I'm like, don't panic, like just watch closely. One thing that I think would probably be applicable to a lot of your providers is that we have one of our sensors is an intraoral sensor, which was not originally intended to be used in a transplant, but just to read the systemic output. So, I think we call it a canary in the coal mine. So that sensor just sits inside the cheek non-invasively. And so anything that affects the systemic oxygen concentration is noticed in minutes. So if there was in a critical moment some whatever medication pushed, you would know whether that improved the systemic output or systemic O2 or had a deficit on it. So I think that's pretty huge. So I'm hopeful that as we continue to develop those things, it does make its way into the critical care world as well.
I think it would be powerful, Rob, but from a number of reasons. But like you said, it is a canary in a coal mine. So it's a marker or a baseline of objective stability or instability. And it's almost like you say, it can sit there residually. The clinician can focus on other stuff. But then if there is any acute or chronic deviation, they can come right back to it straight away. So it's almost a circuit breaker that can help them in problem solving. So I definitely see leverage within IFTs, these longer term critical care transfers, because actually, like you said, we want this sensitive real time data. We want trended data over time just to see if the longevity of our treatment pathway is making the patient better or indeed worse. But could you maybe speak to what's next for you in this space, Rob?
I've just continued to develop. Well, two things. We would have to bring costs down, right? If we're going to get this, and if we're going to use this to monitor, a septic patient, something like that, something which is every day, everywhere, we need to get costs down. Of course, you do that by expanding and growing. That allows you to get margins down, but just other ways of monitoring everything. Because frankly, the technology, it doesn't matter what it's pointing at. So for us, it's how do we get it where we want it, whether it's an organ transplant or a buried flap is something we're looking at now, tissue that doesn't have any skin attached to it. So how do we get either our existing sensors or additional sensors into where we can monitor remotely without being able to see the tissue, and act in the same way as that intraoral sensor that gives us the, that systemic value. So I think that's in the future for us. And it's sort of fun being in a place where you've got something that is real world now and being used now and gaining acceptance, plus with all these sort of like other ways to use it. And I think what is fascinating is it's the surgeons who tell you that. It's the clinicians that go, you know what, this would be, I could see using this for X. I could see using this for Y. And so we can then work with our engineering team and our clinical team to either modify what we have or create something new, because the algorithm works no matter what tissue we are, as long as it knows what type of sensor it is, it can work on any tissue. So that's it, and exciting in itself.
That's fantastic, Rob. And I think what we'll do is we'll put links in the show notes to indeed the monitor, because it's the adaptation and, like you said, the versatility of the innovation, which is going to be really interesting for critical care, because I think it's around leveraging data to benefit the clinician and ultimately the patient, and then again, how we use maybe AI to trend and indeed pattern recognize any deviations, and then inform the clinician in a helpful way. Because interestingly, information isn't necessarily helpful unless it's collected in a way which is either trended or indeed interpreted to benefit the clinician, because you can have information overwhelm quite quickly, but in a cohesive way with indeed other markers, it can be super useful for that kind of trend of the patient, which I could see definitely applicability to critical care.
Yeah, sure. And we have the ability to share that now. As we create more educational tools, part of it is, what can we do to shorten that learning curve? So we have developed some things in that nature, because there are general averages, right? It doesn't mean that if someone's 5 points below or 10 points below what that quote unquote normal range is, it's a problem. It just means it's an outlier. But again, as you mentioned, we're going to watch that trend, and a tissue or something that's in trouble. We all know it doesn't just drop to a certain level and then go static again. You will have continued drops. So you'll see that trend continue to worsen, and then you know when to intervene. So there is a learning curve as far as for each specialty or clinician when that moment is, but we can certainly impart the knowledge we have and share the experience along with our key opinion leaders in the field.
So, Rob, as we're coming to land on the conversation, I just wondered if you can maybe speak to some take-home points that you would advocate regarding tissue oximetry monitoring.
The takeaways. Well, I think it's becoming, at least in the field we're focusing on, it's becoming increasingly more important. It's a tool. It doesn't replace the human aspect in any way, and it shouldn't be used in that way. Folks go through a tremendous amount of training, and nothing can replace that gut. But if you have tools in your bag, much like our device, that can just help you hone that skill a little bit better. If we can get to that patient, 30 minutes sooner than we would have otherwise gotten to them. It's funny because when they have surgeons, and again, I'm talking about surgeons, but any clinician, you have a gut feeling. They have a gut feeling about a patient, an outcome. And so I think that the ones they're not worried about, they can just sort of set aside, go home, and and be with the family. And the ones they are worried about, they can watch it on their phone. So I think more technologies will head that way to where there is a remote application possibility for them. And that's the future. But it should be really just a tool. It should not replace. I don't think we're in a position to have robots doing all the work at this point. I'm not ready for that anyway.
Yeah, indeed.
But a little AI assistance with the human touch, I think, we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, Rob, around sort of leveraging this sensitive data and then either getting a machine or indeed a person to triangulate. I very much, as a clinician, would triangulate data for cardiac arrest patients, from an ultrasound and an ETCO2 and an ECG. There's no reason why in an acute respiratory patient or indeed excessive blood loss, you can't triangulate some of these data points to really guide treatment, guide future treatment. And also to your point earlier that you said, the baseline might be deviated in the first place. And actually it's accepting that there's going to be deviation of baseline because these patients are acutely sick anyway. But actually, so it's acknowledging that, but it's looking for trends over time, which is super helpful, and having sensitive real-time data, and indeed having hemoglobin data as well as oxygen saturation data is super helpful over time. And so listen, it's really exciting in this space. I can't wait to see where you go next. Actually, we'll put links in the show notes to the device, and just thank you for your time, Rob.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Owen. It was really a pleasure.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.